Welcome everybody, Shiur number 627. We're learning to Le'ilim Nishmas Moshe Doiv ben Rabban Zis, Le'ilim Nishmas Blima Basra Moshe, and that Yitzchak Yosef ben Miri Malka Shefa'ale ben Machzal Shuva. Getting back to our malacha of TOFAIR sewing. So we want to talk a little bit about the safety pin. It's famous in the malacha of TOFAIR, the safety pin. So what could be wrong with a safety pin? Some might ask. What does the safety pin have to do with sewing? So a lot of times what happens is somebody's head, let's say during the week, for example, during the week, one's hem comes down and the person's not able to sew up the hem. Let's say the hem of a skirt or somebody's cuffs might fall down. Sometimes, a person in yeshiva or the young woman or whatever the case is, they can't sew up the hem right away. So what one will do very simply is put in a safety pin. Now, as far as a regular pin, sometimes that's a little bit dangerous. It's, obviously it could cut the skin and so on. You have to be very careful. A safety pin is what really should be used during the week if one needs, and not a regular pin, because again, the regular pins, they start to slip out and they're very sharp and it could mamish cause damage. So, but using a regular safety pin is what a person does. They hold up the hem, they hold up the cuff in the meantime till they could get either to a tailor or sew it up themselves. So now the question is, if one's hem or one's cuff or one seam for that matter opens up on Shabbos, is there a problem with putting in a safety pin in reference to keeping the material together until one could actually go ahead and sew it after Shabbos? So, Lamaisa, to make a long story short, there's a famous carbon nisanal that's brought down actually in the Mishnah Berurah. The Taka says that Lamaisa, it's a problem. The safety pin would be a problem. What's the problem? It's just like when you take a regular needle with a thread and you sew, again, going with the guidelines that we've been talking about until now, one stitch we said is nothing. Obviously, 2 stitches would be a question of a D'Rabbanan. 3 stitches is already dealing with a D'Oraisa. So the same thing says the carbon nisanal. Why would it be different if one uses a safety pin or a regular pin or a safety pin? Either way, it's the same thing basically. Because if you think about it, what's happening? You take the needle and with the thread you go in and out, in and out. You have the 3 stitches and good, and now it stays. You take 2 pieces of material. What is TOFAIR? Let's chazer over again. We review again. TOFAIR sewing is in halacha is taking the 2 pieces of material and making them into one as much as possible by sewing them together. So if you think about it, one takes a safety pin, you're sort of doing the same thing. One's hem comes down or one's cuff comes down. So they take the 2 pieces of material and they just, instead of using a thread and needle, the metal piece of the safety pin is becoming the thread. So now what's happening is, if one does that to the hem, if one does that to their cuff, for example, and they do it with 3 stitches, they do it through in and out 3 times, and they bring together the 2 pieces of material from the hem, the part that fell down, they're now attaching it back up to the regular part of the skirt, or the cuff falls down, or the inside of a pants hem falls down, and they now reattach it to the place where it was attached before with the thread. Instead of a thread, they're just using the safety pin. So again, to make a long story short, says the carbon nisanal that it is a problem, taka, because and again, it's brought down in the Mishnah Berurah like that because of the fact that it's instead of the thread, and when one does 3 stitches, you're running into a major problem. Okay, now comes along others, some major poskim, and say, no, what does that have to do with, what does the safety pin have to do with connecting the 2 pieces like a thread? So just to give one example, you have the Chazon Ish. The Mishnah Berurah Eis V'Hada brings down the Chazon Ish that says, Kosav shetoichav machat lehodek lefisha. If one uses this pin or safety pin and they only use it for a short period of time, a few hours till the end of Shabbos, and that's all. And then I'll sew it up and I'll take care of with my pants, I'll take care of the hem or whatever. Kemahadik, so says the Chazon Ish, using it for a short period of time, only a few hours till the end of Shabbos, is kemahadik bekrosim. It's like you're using like regular hooks. And when one hooks something together, keres is a regular hook. When one hooks something together, this is not, what does this have to do with TOFAIR sewing? And it says the Chazon Ish is for a short period of time. Ve'em bezeh shemetz shel tefira klal. This has nothing to do with the malacha of TOFAIR. Comes along Rab Moshe also in a tshuva, and the Igros Moshe brings down that Lamaisa using a safety pin it's like hooks, and not just that, it's like a button, like somebody uses a button. You can't say that every time you button the shirt or you button the blouse that it's a question of sewing. That's not called sewing. That's not considered whereby you're taking two pieces and you're making them into one, which is TOFAIR really is. When one buttons a garment, this is not considered sewing. And says Ramosha further that li'olam shnei chalukim and shnei chelkim, they always going to stay two separate pieces. In other words, TOFAIR is only whereby I use the thread and I make it into one. Over here, when you're using the safety pin, it's always going to stay two separate pieces. So to make a long story short, there's a lot of various different poskim on both sides, major poskim. So it's very hard to say one is allowed to use a safety pin, one is not allowed to use a safety pin. But we want to go through it. But Lamaisa, what should one do? Could one? Can't one? If somebody did it, is it HILCHOS Shabbos? Is there a way that you could do it possibly? So let's go through. The Sefer Shabbos Home has a nice, beautiful shtickle on it in the English section, and we'll see how he comes out, and we'll go from there. But the bottom line is we have to note that we have major poskim, obviously, on both sides. Carbon Nesanel, Mishabura brings them down like that. To be Machmir, Chazonish, Rav Moshe on the other side, and many, quite a number of other poskim on both ends also. Brings down the Sefer Shabbos Home like this, that there's a question whether, he brings it out on page 69, by the way, there's a question whether fastening with a safety pin is considered a form of sewing. In other words, by threading the pin back and forth through an item and closing the end, which again, a hem, a cuff, or the like. Okay. He goes weiter, he says, many poskim hold that there is no difference than sewing with a thread. In other words, a safety pin is just like you're sewing with a thread, and like we saw, the carbon sandal and others. Whereas others contend that this is not considered sewing, right? So we saw the others on the other side also. A third opinion differentiates between attaching the pin temporarily and permanently. And that we saw was the opinion of the Chazonish, which the Chazonish said when it's a temporary thing, this is nothing. If it's a permanent thing, then the Chazonish was holding it's running into a problem. Because don't forget, if you think about it, one uses it for long-term period, they stick in the safety pin and they're going to leave it there for a long time, then it's becoming already. Then we could talk that it's already becoming like the regular thread, whereby it would be a problem. This is sort of along the lines of the Chazonish. So Lemais, he goes further, and he says, as a Sefer Shabbos Home, that since this issue involves a possible biblical prohibition, in other words, Asur min HaTorah, because there are those who say it's a shaila of Asur min HaTorah, because of the fact that it's just like a regular sewing. So therefore, we must adopt the stringent view. When we have a suffix deraisa, we have to be extremely careful and be machmir in such a case. However, there are circumstances in which the use of a pin can be permitted. Okay, so real quickly, just to go through it. Number one, as we've spoken about, one of the gedarim of one of the guidelines of TOFAIR is inserting the pin once is not the malacha at all. As mentioned, he says previously, passing a thread through fabric only once is not considered sewing at all. This is not the malacha of TOFAIR. So just like it's not the malacha of TOFAIR with a thread, it would not be the malacha of TOFAIR with a safety pin. He goes further and says, it's therefore would be allowed, it is permitted to pass a safety pin through two pieces of fabric merely once and to close the pin. So again, what are we doing over here? You pass the safety pin through two pieces. You take the two parts that are, the piece that's falling down from the hem or the cuff or whatever, and you stick it through the two pieces of the fabric only one time through, and then you close the pin. In other words, you're doing it the other way, as opposed to like a thread which would be parallel to the material. You're doing it the opposite way, just putting it right through just to hold it together a little bit. Like this, the pin goes through each piece of the material one time, and that is not TOFAIR, not with a thread and not with a safety pin. So just to clarify, he says the pin should pierce the fabric only once and emerge on the opposite side. He just brings at the end that practically speaking, one must do this near the ends of the item being fastened in order to be able to close the safety pin. Okay, we'll stop here. We'll continue next time and go through some more various ways in reference to how a safety pin possibly could be used on Shabbos. Thank you for listening. Aslach and bracha kol tov.